Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. I recently did a video about umbrella rig retrieves. So some of you might refer to it as an A rig or an Alabama rig, but this is what I'm talking about right here. It is a multi-armed contraption that you can put multiple baits onto, and it's a really good bait year round, but it excels extremely well during the cold water period. So much so that a lot of people consider this to be cheating. And that's one of the reasons why it's not used or not legal in a lot of tournaments, specifically more so professional level events. Like I can't actually throw this in the tournaments that I fish. But having said that, I still like to throw it during the cold water period. It's a really good bait at generating big bites, and it's a really good bait at generating strikes from fish that are just not actively feeding. There's a lot of baits that you just can't get bid on during your cold water period, but this is one of the best baits for generating strikes. Now, when I did that video, I did have a couple of questions and comments from viewers regarding them. And one of the viewers specifically said, Matt, I love to throw an umbrella rig. The problem is when I go to make the cast, what I find is my line is continuously fouling on either the arms of the bait, so it's wrapping around an arm, or it's getting caught on one of the different hooks that's on the contraption. So they asked me if I had any suggestions to limit the number of times when the umbrella rig fouls on the cast. Because the problem is when you make that cast, and if your line does get hung up on the bait, it comes back in and it's a ruined cast at that point. You're not going to generate strikes, or at least you've just very uh you've decreased the chances of getting strikes. I'm not going to say you can't. The reality is you're probably not going to get a cast if your bait is foul, or get a bite if your bait is fouled up. So I've got a solution to this, guys, that resolves the majority of issues when using an umbrella rig with it fouling on the cast.
Today's video is brought to you by the Deep Dive app. This has had an amazing new update. As you guys know, I love the water clarity feature. As you can see right here, we're looking at Grand Lake, which just had a whole pile of rain come into it. It went from being really clear to having a lot of dirty water coming in the bottom end of it. Just an amazing feature to be able to determine where the clear water is versus the muddy water. However, they just introduced the wind effects. Now, the wind effects is really cool because we've had wind effects as part of the app in the past, but all it did is show where the wind was hitting the shoreline the most, as you can see from the dots, the orange and bright red dots, which indicate where the wind is really striking. But now the wind feature also indicates what the wave action is like on the lake itself. So some of the features you're going to get from this is determining where to get from place to place safely by avoiding the heavy, rough water conditions. You'll be able to determine where you may have some of the strongest current flow and some of the places where you can fish to stay protected. Now, along with that, you still have some of my favorite features like the patterns that you've got on the lake that indicate the best baits and lures to fish with. You've also got the water inflow app, which shows you where a bunch of the rain input comes in. That can be an amazing pattern to fish throughout the year. Just a great feature to have. So many positive features anytime you're fishing or using the Deep Dive app. Just points you in the right direction to catch more fish. Whether you're a tournament angler or a local fun fisherman that's just out to catch a few fish, the Deep Dive app will help you catch more fish next time you're out on the water.
So a couple of things that you need to understand when using these, you've got a couple of main components here that can foul on themselves. So the first being the length of the arms. If you have the arms collapse too much so, they tend to get baits that foul up on them. So one main suggestion is to spread the arms out to the point where the baits can make some contact, but generally they're not going to catch on each other's hooks. So I do like to spread them out a little bit. Now, having said that, I'm not looking to spread them out to the point where, they're just really spread out and the whole bait's a much bigger contraption. I like to have them so that the bait is coming through and it's a little bit more of a uh, school of bait fish where they're just running tight together. Now, that's the first thing. If you've got it to the point where it's too spread out, it doesn't look as good in the water and you don't generate as many bites. And if you've got it too collapsed, the baits fall on themselves quite a bit. So the first is make sure you've got the arms spread out to a point where you're not going to have a lot of contact between baits. The other is you also have to take into account the length of the baits that you're using. If you've got baits with really long tails, you're going to have to spread it out a little bit more. Now, those are kind of your basic tips with respect to the umbrella rig. The biggest key I can give you to keep your line from wrapping around the arms is one, make a cast where you're not just trying to fling that bait as hard as you can and throwing it high into the water. You're generally better if you make a underhand cast that is more of a line drive cast where you let that rod load up and then you slingshot it forward. But you want to maintain control of the cast. You want your baits flying through the air first with the head of the bait staying pointing back at you. Now, that is one main key. The problem these days is we're starting to see a lot of smaller umbrella rigs being made, micro ones with much shorter arms that are made for much lighter baits. And what happens with that is your bait doesn't cast as well, right? The lighter you get, the more the bait wants to rotate. The more spinning in the air means the more it's going to catch on your line or the baits you're going to hook. Well, if you're throwing your smaller umbrella rigs these days where you don't have a bunch of quarter ounce heads or 3/8 ounce heads, and you've got, say, a 16th ounce head and an 1/8 ounce head, and you got short little arms, one of the best tips I can give you is when you go to tie your bait onto your line onto your umbrella rig, before tying your knot, get yourself a little bit of this tubing right here. This is just surgical tubing. There's a bunch of different types of tubings you can get. It's just hose, really, is what it is. You can go to your local hardware store and buy it. This is the 1/8 inch size. And then I like to cut a little 4-inch piece. Now, in this case, I've got it tied on. I'm just going to slide it on from the other end, since that'll be easier versus tying it all on for you. But the idea here is if you've got, come on, if you've got this little piece of tubing on in front of your bait, just like that, when you go to cast, what that tubing is going to do is it's going to limit your line from swinging freely and getting caught in these various portions. Now, the longer you go, the less issue you're going to have. But what I found is a 3 or 4 inch piece of tubing above it will work great. And this tubing basically disappears in the water. Plus, you're throwing a giant contraption already made of arms and blades where I'm really not that concerned about having it. But it's the exact same process that you would use a small piece of tubing with your prop style baits. A lot of people will use literally just like a little 1/2 inch piece of tubing. And what that does is that tubing prevents the line from getting caught in that front prop. Well, that idea is the exact same here with your umbrella rigs. If you have a piece of tubing tied on in front of your umbrella rig, when you go to make that cast, that tubing just limits the amount of line that's going to get caught on the arms. Just a really simple tip, but it is one that I've found to be extremely beneficial when I'm using a lot of your smaller finesse style umbrella rigs, where I end up having a lot more of the line tumbling through the air, getting caught in the bait, and just fouling the bait on the cast. You can really limit most of that just by adding a little bit of tubing to your line before tying on your bait. Simple tip, makes a world of difference, guys. So if you are having trouble, if you've gone out and you've gotten some of the more micro rigs, like Picasso has that new micro umbrella rig that they just came out with that's got 16th ounce heads. If you want to throw that with really light baits, you got to be very disciplined on the cast to keep that bait from really tumbling through the air. But a simple tip like this, by putting a piece of tubing on it, will help you prevent those fouls on the cast. Just a simple tip, guys. If you're heading out on the water these days, hopefully you've got open water, because I don't anymore. But if you do and you want to throw an umbrella rig, don't be afraid to put a little piece of tubing in front of your bait. It will help you. Hopefully this tip is something that you guys enjoyed. If so, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and stay tuned. We'll have a new tip coming out tomorrow.